Hello everyone, and welcome to the Pisces Guide to Pop Culture. I'm of course your host, TJ West, and today I wanted to talk to you briefly about Guy Gavriel Kay's new book, Written on the Dark, which is, a really awesome book because Guy Gavriel Kay is just a phenomenal writer. I've been a fan of his work for about 2 decades now, ever since I discovered Sailing for Sarantium, the first of his book series called the Sarantine Mosaic. But anyway, I don't want to get too far on that. I could go on about that for days. So anyway, if you know anything about Guy Gavriel Kay, you know that he is really very skilled at combining history and fantasy. And although many of his works don't have a really heavy fantasy element, it's clear that this takes place in a different universe than ours. There's a magic presence in what's called the half-world, but it's not high fantasy as we normally would think of it. And in this particular case, the period of history that he's reimagining is medieval France, which in this world is called Ferrier. The capital is Oran, and he primarily focuses on this character named Thierry, or Thierry, I'm not sure how he would pronounce it in contemporary French, who's a poet, and he sort of gets drawn into this political assassination that is perpetrated against the king's brother. The king is mad, much like the mad King Charles of medieval France. And as a result of all this, Thierry's path sort of crosses with all sorts of historical figures, including this universe's Joan of Arc, here called Jeannette, the Maiden, as well as other poets. He has a lover named Sylvie. He has a soldier that falls in love with him. There's all sorts of lovely pieces, and it's a beautiful kind of melancholic reflection on poetry and on the ways that we as people kind of make sense of our world, even when it's falling into chaos and barbarism. And in that sense, I think it's a very timely piece. And, Kay is very, skilled and very evocative as a writer. I think that, it's a slender book. It's about 300 pages, but there's just so much beauty and lyricism packed into it that I really kind of just felt myself drawn into this prose, as I always do with Kay. I have yet to find a book of his that I didn't love. I really like the books that are set in this universe, though. These are always my favorites, and they always kind of capture my heart and my imagination. And, I would say this is one of the queerest novels that he's written, and I say that very complimentarily, obviously. We have a character that is what we would probably call intersex or non-binary. We have a character who is, a gay man who ends up falling in love with our main character, Thierry, and the gay character ends up fighting against during the conquest of this universe's Constantinople, known as Sarantium, fighting to keep it against the conquest. So, here we see this gay character being incorporated into the defense of Sarantium when it's about to be conquered by the forces of this world's Turkish army. So there's a lot going on in this book. There's a lot of plot, and it's obviously, as I said, it's very much based on the Battle of Agincourt and all those kinds of things that are taking place, the 100 Years' War between France and England. The difference, of course, here is that France, also known as Ferrier, wins, and the Henry V figure ends up getting taken captive and ends up sort of dying in prison. So anyway, lots of different things going on here. But I do think that the book, above everything else, is about the pursuit of beauty, of how we use words to make sense of ourselves and our world and our interiority. I think that there's just so much to enjoy about the way that Kay this command of language that just, I don't think that it's exaggerating to say that he's really kind of writing poetry in prose. And I mean that not just because his main character is a poet, but also because if you've read his work, it's grappling with philosophy, it's grappling with these big ideas of beauty, of art, of war, of the soul and the spirit. What do we do when we're drawn into great historical affairs despite our best efforts to stay out of it all? And I think that this is something that makes it so uniquely pertinent to our own world, where so many of us, are living in interesting times. We've all clearly been cursed to live in interesting times. And I just, for some reason, I think that's why, actually, this novel called to me now, even more than Kay's work usually does. And I was left really kind of just thinking as I finished it. I was left grappling with some of the bigger issues that it raised, and I felt a lot of things. I mean, I feel a lot of things all the time. That's why it's called The Pisces Guide to Pop Culture. And I think that's why I'm really drawn to books like this that have a sort of melancholy ethos. As the novel draws it to its conclusion, and we learn of what happens to all the characters afterward and how they grapple with loss and grief and all those sorts of things, it just sort of hits you in the heart. There's a real poignancy, I think, to Written on the Dark, as well as a lot of other of Kay's work, the Sarantine Mosaic, Lions of Albersan, all of that stuff. He frequently evokes those feelings of loss, of mourning, of grief, but also beauty and joy and love. And I mean, what else is fantasy for but to kind of capture those bigger human emotions? You know, to allow us new ways to experience them. You know, I talked a lot a couple weeks ago about escapism and why I write in genres like romance and why I write in fantasy as well. And I think it's because of that reason that these are genres that are all about feelings and about getting into the sort of what makes us human and how we grapple with the world that we find ourselves in. So, in other words, I really did enjoy Written on the Dark. It literally just came out, I believe, in May, so it's a brand new release. I really, really highly recommend it. I recommend all of Kay's books, frankly. This is a good intro point. Like, I mean, you certainly will enjoy it if you've read a lot of his other oeuvre, but if this is your first Kay, I think you'll get just as much out of it. You know, if you love historical fiction, if you love fantasy, if you love those two things put together, there's really no one writing in this tradition quite like Kay. I mean, I have tried writing my hand at it sometimes, and I've achieved a little bit of it, but he really just has an entire subgenre of fantasy in his fic all to himself, and that's really quite an extraordinary achievement. So again, Written on the Dark by Guy Gavriel Kay. It gets a full-throated endorsement from the Pisces Guide to Pop Culture, so if that's something you look for, then I think you'll enjoy it. So give it a read. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you're a Kay fan, let me know so we can bond over this, because I don't meet a lot of Guy Gavriel Kay fans in the wild, but I would love to connect with you. So anyway, that is all for today's entry of the Pisces Guide to Pop Culture. I'm, of course, your host, TJ. Take care, y'all.